I know you blame me for what happened back then, but I did what I thought was right.
Ash, please, don't leave me out here like this.
The wolf's body crumpled to the ground with a final, twisted jerk. Ash stood over it, chest heaving. His rough hands trembled as he slid the arrow out. The metal tip was slick with blood, thick and dark in the morning light. His face was carved from years of solitude and regret. Wrinkles deepened around eyes that had seen more loss than any man should. The wolf's mouth was still open, its breath gone, a shallow, wasted thing. His fingers tightened around the shaft, then released. He knelt beside it, his body stiff and slow, like the bones had been waiting for this moment to remind him of his age. He dug. The dirt slid under his hands, heavy and unforgiving, but it wasn't the earth he felt in his fingertips. It was the sharp grief that bled through his chest, a thing that had been buried deep for years. He dug faster now, sweat sticking to his shirt. There was something familiar in this moment, an echo of a time he thought was buried, a life that should have been left in the past. His mind flickered to his wife, his daughter. The fire that took them. The betrayal. His breath hitched, but he pushed it down. When the hole was deep enough, he shoved the wolf into the ground, his arms shaking as he piled dirt over the creature. He stood over the grave, silent. The wind swept through the trees, and he looked at the cabin in the distance, a shadow on the horizon. A sound interrupted the quiet. A voice, faint, lost in the wind. "Papa?" His heart stopped. He turned slowly, his face tightening. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a young woman, wild-eyed and drenched from the rain. She took a step forward, but then hesitated. "Papa," she said again, her voice soft and steady. Ash's stomach twisted. The word, that name, hit him like a blow to the chest. But it wasn't her fault. She didn't know. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I've been looking for you." "They said I'd find you here," she said, eyes darting nervously around him, but never leaving his face. He felt a sharp pang in his chest. "You've got the wrong man." The woman took another step. "I'm not wrong." Her eyes searched his face, seeing something there, something he couldn't bury. "You are him." "Papa." Ash took a step back, eyes narrowing. His hand instinctively moved to his side, fingers brushing the handle of the rifle at his waist. She didn't seem scared. She didn't know. "You need to leave," he said, but his voice wavered. "Now." Her lips parted, but she didn't move. She only stared, waiting. It was clear she wasn't going anywhere. And that simple truth cut deeper than any arrow could. The woman, this girl, was here to stay. Ash stood still, arms folded, watching the rain fall. His cabin loomed behind him, its weathered wood darkening under the steady downpour. Eliza, the woman who had called him Papa, was crouched by the fire pit, her back turned to him as she tried, once again, to spark a flame. She muttered under her breath, frustration lacing her words. "You're not going to start that fire with wet wood," he said, his voice gruff but calm. Eliza flinched, pausing before turning her head to look at him. Her wet hair clung to her face, but her eyes stayed steady, determined. "I'll manage," she replied, voice tight, yet there was a hint of challenge in it. She dug into the pile of twigs, her fingers moving quickly, despite the slickness of the rain. Ash stayed by the doorway, his arms crossed. "You don't need to be here. You need to leave. Now." Eliza's eyes flashed at his words, but she didn't reply immediately. Instead, she went back to her task, fighting the elements as the rain soaked through her clothes, her body tense with every failed attempt to ignite the pile of dry leaves and kindling. The silence between them stretched, but not in the comfortable way silence often did for Ash. It felt like something was building, and he wasn't sure what that something was. Finally, Eliza spoke, her voice low but sharp. "You think you can push me away that easily? I'm not leaving." Ash bristled. "I don't know who you think you are, but—" "You're not the only one with ghosts," Eliza interrupted. "You think I don't know how to fight? You think I don't know how to survive this rain? This place? You think you're the only one with a past that chases them?" He said nothing, just stared at her, his gaze heavy and unreadable. She wasn't backing down, and that much was clear. Eliza finally struck a match and dropped it onto the pile of twigs. The small flame flickered, hesitated, then caught, growing into something more. She looked at Ash then, her eyes steady. "I'm not leaving until I understand what's going on. Until you tell me who you are." Ash's jaw tightened. The rain beat harder against the roof, and for a moment, he couldn't find the words to push her away. He hated how her voice, her presence, cracked something open inside him that he wasn't ready to face. But she was right. He had nowhere to hide. "You're here because of them," Ash muttered, almost to himself. Eliza, hearing the shift in his tone, stood up slowly, brushing her hands on her pants. "Them?" she asked, her voice softer now. He didn't answer, his eyes narrowing as he turned away from the fire, walking back to the cabin. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his words heavy with warning. But Eliza followed him, her boots squelching in the mud. "I know enough," she said, standing just outside the door. "I'm not leaving until I hear the truth from you." Ash didn't look at her as he spoke, his voice low, raw. "There's nothing here for you, girl. Just rain. Just a haunted man. And that's it? That's all you have to offer? Nothing but your silence?" She stepped closer, unwavering. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Ash's fists clenched at his sides. He could feel her words stirring something dark inside him, something he'd kept buried for too long. The fire inside the cabin crackled, the only warmth in the place. The silence between them deepened, but now, it felt different. Not just tension. Something else. Something like acceptance. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You want the truth?" He turned to face her, eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that seemed to cut through the storm. "You want to know why I'm here, why I live like this? You want to know why I don't let anyone in? It's because I failed. I failed them, my family, my wife, my child." Eliza stood still, her breath catching. "What happened?" Ash's face tightened as if the words were cutting him open. "They died in a fire. I couldn't save them. I couldn't." "I'm sorry," Eliza interrupted, her voice softer now, her anger dissipating for a moment. "I didn't know." Ash swallowed hard, his gaze shifting. The storm outside raged louder, but inside, it was as if time had stopped. "No one knows. No one can know. I can't let anyone close enough to see what's left of me. I'm no one's father. I'm no one's." But Eliza was already there, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You don't have to carry that alone. You don't have to hide anymore." He shook his head, as though her touch burned. "I don't want your pity. You shouldn't be here." But her voice was steady. "I'm not pitying you. I'm asking for the truth. The whole truth. And I'm staying. Whether you want me to or not." Ash stood in the doorway, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He wanted to shut her out, to slam the door and never speak of it again. But for the first time in years, he felt something shift, something break inside him. His voice was hoarse when he spoke again. "You think you're the first one to try to save me? It doesn't work. Nothing works." But Eliza didn't step back. She was right there. She didn't move. Ash sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that mixed with the storm. "I'll make you a deal. You stay the night. Tomorrow, I'll show you the land. You'll see for yourself." Eliza nodded slowly. I'll stay. I'm not going anywhere. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned to the cabin. He knew, deep down, that he wasn't pushing her away anymore. She wasn't just some stranger to him. She was something else, something he hadn't seen in years. He stepped into the cabin, leaving the door ajar for her to follow. And for the first time in a long time, he let the storm rage outside. He didn't need to fight it anymore. The morning was thick with fog, the air heavy as Ash and Eliza walked side by side through the woods. Eliza's boots sank into the damp earth with each step, but her stride never faltered. The smell of wet pine and moss clung to the air, a scent that reminded Ash of the past he could never outrun. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt alive, as if something was waiting in the shadows. Ash's eyes scanned the trees, his senses on high alert. He wasn't used to having anyone with him, especially not someone who refused to leave. He hadn't spoken much since their conversation last night, but Eliza hadn't pushed him either. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, it had settled into something familiar, like a weight they both carried. Eliza walked ahead, her face set in concentration, her movements purposeful. You know, she said, glancing back at him, you don't have to keep acting like you're a ghost. You're alive, Ash. I can tell. Ash's lips pressed into a tight line, but he didn't answer. He'd never been one for words, never needed them. His life had been defined by action, by survival. But something about Eliza made him feel like he didn't have to be so damn alone. They pushed through the underbrush, the mist swirling around their legs. And then, there it was. A pale horse stood in the clearing ahead, its coat dirty and matted from the elements. It wasn't moving, just standing there, eyes wide, empty. Ash froze. A chill crawled up his spine. He didn't need to be told, he knew what this was. It was a warning. It was the past coming back to him, like it always did. What is it? Eliza asked, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp knife. Ash didn't respond right away. His eyes were locked on the horse, its body still and silent, but its presence suffocating. A memory faint, distant, flashed in his mind. The horse. The pale coat. It was part of a story his grandfather had told him. A myth. A warning. A sign of death. He moved toward the animal, his boots crunching on the wet ground. Eliza followed, hesitant but determined. Ash, what's going on? He didn't look back. Stay close, he muttered, his voice low. This isn't good. As he approached the horse, the air seemed to thicken, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The horse's eyes stared back at him, empty and hollow, but still alive. Ash's throat tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The weight of the past, the guilt, the betrayal, it all pressed down on him, suffocating him. The horse was a symbol of everything he had lost, everything he had failed to protect. Don't, Eliza whispered behind him, her voice shaking. Don't touch it. But Ash didn't listen. He reached out, his fingers brushing the horse's neck. And the moment his skin made contact, a shiver ran through him, sharp and cold. The horse's body jerked, its eyes flicking to the side, and for a split second, Ash saw something, a figure, pale and indistinct, standing just beyond the trees. His breath caught in his throat. The figure vanished just as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Ash, what's happening? Eliza's voice was frantic now, her hand on his arm. Ash turned to her, his face pale. We need to go, he said, his voice low and urgent. Now. Eliza didn't argue. She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the horse, her grip tight with a mixture of fear and confusion. But Ash wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the trees, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, as if something was watching him. Who was that? Eliza asked, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Ash didn't answer. He couldn't. He could feel it, the weight of the past closing in on him, the shadows of the dead lingering just beyond the trees. He had spent years trying to outrun it, but it was always here. Always watching. They didn't speak as they hurried through the woods, their feet pounding against the earth as the rain began to pick up again. Ash's mind raced, but all he could think of was the figure, the ghost of his past, the one he couldn't escape. And as they made their way back to the cabin, he realized something. Eliza wasn't just a reminder of what he had lost. She was something else. Something more. She was the key to something he had buried deep inside him. And that terrified him. The rain didn't stop. It never stopped. By the time they reached the cabin, soaked to the bone and silent, the storm had swallowed the land whole. The fire inside flickered weakly, the smoke curling upwards in lazy spirals. Ash didn't say a word as he peeled off his wet coat, leaving it on the floor. Eliza did the same, her movements slow and stiff. She was still shaken by what had happened with the pale horse. Ash was too. His hands trembled as he stoked the fire, throwing another log onto the embers. The cabin, once a home to warmth and laughter, felt cold. Empty. The ghosts in the walls seemed louder now, their whispers scratching at the edges of his mind. "You're not talking," Eliza said, her voice cutting through the thick silence between them. Ash didn't look up. "I don't have much to say." "I think you do." He stopped, the weight of her words heavier than the rain pounding on the roof. Slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes were hard, unreadable. "You think you know me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You think you know anything about this?" Eliza didn't back down. She stepped closer to the fire, warmth catching her wet face. "I know you're running. I know you're hiding." He bristled. "I'm not running." "You are," she pressed. "You've been running your whole life." Ash exhaled sharply, frustration boiling up. He turned away from her, running a hand through his wet hair. "You don't know anything about running," he muttered. But Eliza was closer now, standing in front of him. "I lost my family too, Ash. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to feel like there's nothing left but grief." The words stopped him cold. His face stiffened. For a moment, he almost let himself believe that she understood. But it was just another lie, wasn't it? Another way to bring someone closer just to push them away. But Eliza wasn't done. "The ghosts you're running from," she hesitated, her voice softer. "They're still here, aren't they? I saw something in your eyes today. When we saw that horse. When you touched it." Ash's throat tightened. "I don't want to talk about that." "You have to." The weight of her stare made him feel like he was on the verge of breaking. For a split second, he thought he might tell her everything about the fire, the betrayal, the night he failed them. But then the memory of that night slammed into him, like a wave he couldn't stop. He had already lost everything once. He couldn't lose her too. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice cracked. "I didn't ask for you to come here, for you to..." He cut himself off, swallowing the rest of it. The silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Then, as if the storm outside wasn't enough, something moved in the corner of the room. A flicker. A whisper. Eliza stepped back. "Did you?" But Ash's eyes were already fixed on the shadow. The one near the cracked window, where the light barely touched. A figure in white, standing just beyond the edge of the firelight, a woman with dark hair. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. "Don't look at it," Ash said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't." But it was too late. Eliza had already seen her. The figure, thin and ethereal, seemed to sway with the wind, her face distant and unreadable. She had no feet. She seemed to float just above the ground. The air grew colder. The fire's glow flickered once more, the warmth receding. Ash grabbed Eliza's arm, his grip tight. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, his voice rising in panic. "Now." But Eliza stood frozen, her eyes locked on the woman. "Who is she?" Ash's face was pale, his lips pressed together as he pulled her away from the window. "Don't look at her," he whispered harshly, his voice cracking under the pressure of his fear. The figure didn't move. She just watched them, her eyes hollow and empty. And then, just like that, she was gone. vanished into the dark, leaving only the lingering cold in the room. Eliza tore herself from Ash's grip, her breath shallow. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ash turned away, his hands clenched into fists. She was part of my past. She's dead. But she's never really gone. She's a ghost, isn't she? Eliza asked, stepping closer to him. Ash's eyes flickered, haunted. More than that, he murmured. She's a curse. A memory that won't die. Eliza looked at him then, her face softening with understanding. And you think you're the only one who's cursed? Ash turned toward the fire, his gaze distant. It's not the same. You can't understand. I understand more than you think, Eliza said quietly. And I'm not leaving. Not until you tell me everything. Ash let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. You wouldn't want to know. But Eliza didn't back away. I'm already here. I'm not afraid of the truth. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't running. She was offering him something he hadn't had in years, the chance to stop running too. I'll tell you, he said finally, his voice thick with unspoken words. But you won't like it. And just like that, the storm outside wasn't the only thing that raged on. The rain had finally stopped, but the land was still soaked, the earth thick and heavy beneath their boots. Ash stood outside, his eyes scanning the horizon, the thick fog hanging in the air like a damp blanket. Eliza was at the door, watching him, her figure outlined by the dim light inside the cabin. They hadn't spoken much since the ghost's whisper the night before. The tension was back, heavier than before, thick in the air between them. Eliza stepped outside, her boots crunching in the wet leaves as she walked up to him. She stopped just a few feet away, her voice careful. What now? Ash didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered over the land, the familiar trees and hills that felt more like enemies than home. We head out, he said, finally breaking the silence. I'll show you. Eliza raised an eyebrow, the rainwater dripping from her hair. Show me what? The land, Ash said, his voice low. The places I told you about. The places that hold the memories. Eliza didn't argue. She nodded once, sharply. She was done waiting, done being the one to ask questions. She wanted answers, and she wasn't leaving without them. They walked in silence through the woods, the trees towering over them like silent sentinels. The world felt still, too still. There was something suffocating about it, the quiet pressing in on them. As they moved deeper into the forest, Eliza noticed strange marks on the trees, scratches, gouges that looked too deliberate, too precise to be made by anything natural. Her brow furrowed. What are these? Ash didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge them. His eyes were forward, focused on the path ahead. Keep moving. But Eliza wasn't one to be pushed aside. She stopped, her gaze moving from the marks to Ash. What is this, Ash? What's going on? He turned to face her then, his expression colder than it had ever been. You don't want to know. I do, Eliza pressed. I'm already here. Ash's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Instead, he kept walking, his boots crunching over the wet earth. Eliza stood there for a moment, then followed him, but now, she was watching him more closely. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong. The air felt thick, oppressive, like a storm that was just waiting to break. They walked for what felt like hours, the silence growing heavier with each step. Finally, they came to a clearing, a place that looked different from the rest of the forest. The trees here were warped, twisted, their branches reaching up like gnarled hands. In the center of the clearing stood an old stone well, the rocks covered in moss, the water at the bottom dark and still. Eliza stopped, looking around. Where are we? She asked quietly, her voice almost reverent. Ash didn't answer at first. He stared at the well, his face unreadable. This is where it started, he finally said, his voice tight with something Eliza couldn't place. This is where it all went wrong. How? Ash didn't answer. He took a step toward the well, his movements slow, deliberate. Eliza stepped closer, but she didn't speak. She was waiting, watching. "I came here the night they died," Ash said, his voice barely a whisper. "I came here after everything happened. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I came here, it would make things right." Eliza's heart clenched. "What happened?" Ash's eyes flicked to hers, and for a brief moment, she saw something there, something broken, something raw. He looked away quickly. It wasn't enough. None of it was enough. He took another step toward the well, his fingers brushing the edge of the stone. "The fire, the betrayal, the ones I trusted, they took everything from me. I couldn't save them. I couldn't save anyone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and thick with guilt. Eliza stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to carry this alone, Ash. You don't have to keep running." Ash's breath hitched, and for a moment, he almost let himself believe her. Almost. But then the anger, the frustration, the years of pain came rushing back, and he stepped away from the well, his body stiff. "Stay away from it," he said, his voice low. "Stay away from all of it." Eliza didn't back down. She took another step toward the well, her eyes never leaving his. "What are you afraid of?" Ash's fists clenched. "I'm not afraid," he growled, but the words rang hollow, even to him. "You are," Eliza said softly. "Afraid of the truth. Afraid of what's inside you." Ash turned on her then, his eyes blazing. "You don't understand. You think you know, but you don't." "I know enough," Eliza said, her voice steady, unyielding. "I know you're scared. And I know you're hurting. But this," she gestured to the well, to the land around them. "This is what's holding you back." Ash's chest heaved with frustration. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't know what this place means?" The silence between them thickened again, heavier than before. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Eliza broke the quiet. "We can't move forward until you let go of this," she said softly. "You have to let go, Ash." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Eliza insisted. "I'm not leaving. You don't have to do this alone." The words hit him like a punch to the gut, but he couldn't push them away. He wanted to. He wanted to tell her to leave, to get out of his life, but something stopped him. Something in her voice. Something in her presence. He looked at her then, really looked at her, his heart heavy. "I've been alone for too long." "I know," Eliza said quietly, her eyes softening. "But you don't have to be anymore." Ash stood there, silent, as the weight of her words settled over him. The storm in his chest hadn't subsided, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the only one standing in it. The morning came too quickly, a pale light creeping through the cracks in the cabin's weathered walls. Ash didn't sleep. He couldn't. The weight of Eliza's words, her insistence that he wasn't alone, that he could let go, gnawed at him, making his chest tight. The fire had burned out hours ago, leaving only the faint smell of ash in the air. Eliza was up before him, already moving around the cabin, collecting whatever supplies they might need for the day. Her face was focused, her expression unreadable. There was no more anger in her, no more frustration. Only quiet resolve. Ash watched her for a moment, standing in the doorway, his back against the cold wood of the cabin. "You're not going to say anything?" Eliza asked, her voice softer than he expected. She didn't look up, but her tone cut through the tension. Ash rubbed his hand across his face, the stubble scraping against his palm. "What is there to say?" Eliza turned, her eyes steady. "You've been quiet long enough. You're not fooling anyone, least of all me." Ash stepped away from the door, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He walked toward her, but it felt like he was walking through mud, like the very air was thick with all the things he'd never said. "You want answers," he said finally, his voice low, strained. "Fine. I'll give you one. I failed them. My family. I couldn't protect them. I couldn't save them when they needed me. Eliza paused, her gaze flickering to his, but she didn't speak. The fire, Ash continued, his words starting to spill out faster than he could control. I should have been there. I should have seen it coming. But I was too busy looking the other way. I trusted the wrong people. And they took everything. My wife. My daughter. Gone. Because of my mistakes. Eliza took a slow step forward, but she didn't reach out to him. She didn't try to touch him. You didn't cause that fire, she said quietly. You didn't pull the trigger on it. They did. They're the reason they're dead, Ash shot back, his voice sharp. The ones I trusted. The ones I thought were on my side. They betrayed us. And he stopped, his words catching in his throat. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't save them. Eliza's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. Ash, you're not responsible for their death. Not like you think you are. Yes, I am, he snapped, his hands clenched into fists. I'm the one who failed them. I'm the one who couldn't protect them. They trusted me. And his voice cracked, breaking the final piece of him he was holding together. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do anything. The silence between them stretched long, thick, and suffocating. Eliza took a deep breath, her hands resting at her sides. You don't have to carry that weight anymore. Ash's eyes burned, his body stiff with the anger and pain he'd never let anyone see. I don't know how to stop carrying it. You start by letting go, Eliza said softly, but her words were full of conviction. It's not just your burden to carry anymore. The tension in the room thickened as Ash's breath quickened. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear the weight of her gaze. It was like she could see through him, see the broken parts he had buried so deep inside. But Eliza didn't look away. She waited, patient, like she had been from the very beginning. After a long moment, Ash spoke again, his voice rough. I didn't just lose my family. I lost myself. I lost who I was. And now I don't know who I am anymore. Eliza nodded, understanding in her quiet way. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But you can start somewhere. We can start together. Ash's heart clenched at her words, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. Not now. He turned, walking toward the door. I need to show you something, he said quietly, his voice hollow. Eliza followed him outside, the cold air biting at their skin as they stepped into the open. The sky was still overcast, the rain gone but leaving behind the dampness of the world. Ash led her down the worn path behind the cabin, his boots crunching through the wet leaves. After a few minutes, they came to a clearing, another one of those places that Ash had never let anyone see, another one of those spots that held the ghosts of his past. The trees parted to reveal a small graveyard, the tombstones weathered and worn, names barely legible. He stopped in front of the largest stone, his fingers brushing the rough surface as he spoke. This is where they're buried, he said, his voice shaking. My wife, my daughter. It's where they've been since the fire. Eliza didn't speak, just stood beside him, her presence steady and unbroken. They were taken from me, Ash murmured, his voice breaking. By people I trusted. And I couldn't save them. I couldn't. You're still here, Eliza interrupted softly, her hand resting gently on his arm. You're still here, Ash. And that means something. He looked down at her hand, the touch of it so simple, so real. It was the first time in years that he didn't feel entirely alone. He looked at the gravestones, the names of the people who had once been his whole world. I couldn't protect them. I failed them. You didn't fail them, Eliza repeated. You can't protect people from everything. You can't control what happens. But you're still here. And they wouldn't want you to carry all this alone. Ash's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say to that. His emotions, his grief, everything inside him felt like it was drowning. But Eliza's steady presence, her unwavering support, made him feel like there was a chance. Like maybe, just maybe, he could start to let go. I'll never be the man I was, he he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. But maybe I can be something else. Eliza didn't reply, but she didn't need to. The silence that stretched between them now was different. It wasn't the same suffocating weight of the past. It was a pause. A breath. And for the first time, Ash felt like he might be able to take it. The wind had picked up again, howling through the trees as Ash and Eliza stood at the edge of the clearing. The air felt charged, like the land itself was holding its breath. Eliza could feel it too, the tension, the pull of something deep and ancient. It was in the way the trees loomed over them, how the earth beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with energy. They had come back to the place that had broken Ash, the place where everything had ended. Ash's face was grim, his eyes fixed on the remnants of the charred cabin in front of them. The ruin stood like a ghost of the past, half-standing walls twisted and broken, the foundation cracked and crumbling. The smell of ash still clung to the air, bitter and acrid, as if the fire had only just gone out. "You want to go inside?" Eliza asked, her voice soft, but there was something fierce in her tone. She wasn't just asking about the cabin. She was asking if Ash was ready to confront what he had been running from. Ash didn't answer right away. He stood still, his shoulders stiff, his jaw clenched. His face was set in a mask of anger and pain, like he was holding onto something heavy, something that wouldn't let him go. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and rough. "I need to." Eliza didn't argue. She stepped forward, her boots crunching in the dry dirt, following him as he moved toward the wreckage of his past. The walls of the cabin were still there, but they were barely standing, the fire having eaten away at most of the structure. The roof had caved in, the smoke stains still marking the walls like a permanent scar. Ash stopped just inside the doorway, looking around at the burned remnants. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, and for a moment, it was like nothing had changed. It was just as it had been the night the fire had come, the night everything had ended. His eyes lingered on the broken frame of the door, the place where he had stood, helpless, watching as everything he had loved burned to the ground. Eliza stepped closer to him, her voice quiet. "It's not the same, Ash. The past, it doesn't have to keep you here." He turned to face her, his eyes dark, heavy with the weight of the years. "I don't know if I can ever leave it behind," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I should have been here. I should have saved them." "You can't change what happened," Eliza said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "But you can decide what comes next." Ash closed his eyes for a moment, as if the very thought of moving on was too much. The weight of it pressed down on him, suffocating him. "I don't know how," he muttered. "I don't know how to fix this. To fix myself." "You don't need to fix yourself, Ash," Eliza said, her voice steady, unwavering. "You need to let go. Let go of the guilt. Let go of the shame." Ash looked at her, his eyes searching, but he didn't speak. The air between them grew thick again, like the storm was building inside him. Eliza stood her ground, her eyes soft but determined. The silence stretched between them until Ash finally spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I came back here, I could fix it. I thought maybe if I stood in the ruins of it, I could, somehow bring them back." Eliza shook her head, her hand resting on his arm. "You're not supposed to bring them back, Ash. You're supposed to live. To remember them, yes, but to live." He swallowed hard, the pain in his chest threatening to break him apart. "I've been living in the shadow of their death for so long," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know who I am anymore." "You're still here," Eliza said softly. "And that means something." Ash stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide if he could trust her words, if he could trust himself. The wind howled louder, the branches of the trees swaying above them, but Eliza didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Finally, Ash let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted, even just a little. "I've been hiding from this place, from the memories, from everything," he said, his voice thick. "But maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to let go." Eliza's eyes softened, her hand resting on his arm, her touch grounding him. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here." Ash didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The words didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was that he wasn't alone. For the first time in years, he wasn't standing in the ruins of his past by himself. They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them no longer suffocating. The wind had picked up again, but it felt different now. Less like a storm, and more like the promise of something new. Ash turned away from the cabin, his eyes still lingering on the broken remnants of the life he had lost. "It's time to leave," he said quietly, his voice steady now. "Time to bury the past for good." Eliza nodded, her hand still resting on his arm, guiding him away from the wreckage. They walked away from the ruins together, the wind at their backs, the future uncertain, but not as dark as it had been. For the first time, Ash felt like he could breathe again. The ghosts were still there, lingering in the shadows, but they weren't chasing him anymore. And that was enough for now. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. Ash and Eliza stood at the edge of the forest, the open fields stretching out before them. The air felt different now, lighter, almost. The storm had passed, the sky clearing into soft hues of orange and pink. It was the kind of sunset that felt like a promise. But for Ash, it wasn't just the end of the day. It was the end of something bigger. The end of the ghosts that had followed him for so long. He stood silently, his back to Eliza, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His shoulders, once heavy with the weight of his past, now felt lighter. There was still pain there, still scars he couldn't erase, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like he was drowning under it. He didn't feel alone anymore. Eliza was beside him, her presence solid and steady. She didn't say anything at first, just stood next to him, watching the sky change. The quiet between them wasn't filled with tension. It was comfortable, familiar. A silence that didn't need words. "You're not going to stay here, are you?" Eliza asked after a while, her voice soft but direct. Ash didn't look at her. His eyes were still fixed on the horizon, the landscape stretching out like a canvas, waiting to be filled. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not staying." Eliza didn't push him for more. She had learned enough about Ash to know that he didn't speak about his decisions lightly. When he said he wasn't staying, there was something final about it. "Where will you go?" she asked, though she knew it didn't matter. Wherever he went, he would carry his past with him. It wasn't something he could leave behind, but at least it wasn't the burden it once had been. "I don't know," Ash replied. "Somewhere where I can finally stop running." His voice was thick, but there was a note of finality to it. For the first time, he wasn't running from anything, not the ghosts, not the fire, not the memories. He was walking away from them, but he wasn't carrying them on his back anymore. He was free. Eliza nodded, understanding more than she let on. She had seen the change in him. He had finally stopped hiding, stopped fighting the memories that had defined him for so long. But there was one more thing she needed to say. "You're not just leaving, Ash," Eliza said, her voice steady. "You're moving forward." Ash glanced at her then, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in what felt like days. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She was right. He wasn't running anymore. He was walking toward something, even if he didn't know exactly what that something was yet. For the first time in years, Ash felt like he could breathe. The land around them, the place that had once held nothing but memories of loss and pain, felt different now. It wasn't home, not in the way it had been before, but it was something new. Something that wasn't defined by his past. He let out a long breath, his chest rising and falling with the release of something he didn't even realize he'd been holding on to. Eliza's hand brushed his arm, light and reassuring. She didn't need to say anything else. She was with him, and that was enough. Ash turned toward her, his face softening for the first time in ages. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but full of something deeper than words. Gratitude, yes, but also something else. Something that felt like healing. Eliza smiled, a small, quiet smile, the kind that didn't need anything more than the truth between them. "You don't need to thank me." Ash nodded slowly, his eyes tracing the horizon once more. The weight of the past, the guilt, the pain, they were still there, but they didn't define him anymore. The sun sank lower, painting the world in golden light. It felt like a new beginning, but also the end of something old. Ash knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the past would try to creep back in. But today, standing beside Eliza, he felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, he could stop running. They stood there for a long time, watching the sky change, the silence between them no longer heavy but full of understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Ash felt the future stretch out before him, not as a weight, but as a possibility. A song began to play, soft and distant, carried by the wind. It was a song of the land, of the people who had lived and died here. A song of memories, of ghosts that had finally found peace. Ash didn't know the words, but he didn't need to. He knew the meaning. And for the first time, he listened. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. Ash and Eliza stood at the edge of the forest, the open fields stretching out before them. The air felt different now, lighter, almost. The storm had passed, the sky clearing into soft hues of orange and pink. It was the kind of sunset that felt like a promise. But for Ash, it wasn't just the end of the day. It was the end of something bigger. The end of the ghosts that had followed him for so long. He stood silently, his back to Eliza, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His shoulders, once heavy with the weight of his past, now felt lighter. There was still pain there, still scars he couldn't erase, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like he was drowning under it. He didn't feel alone anymore. Eliza was beside him, her presence solid and steady. She didn't say anything at first, just stood next to him, watching the sky change. The quiet between them wasn't filled with tension. It was comfortable, familiar. A silence that didn't need words. "You're not going to stay here, are you?" Eliza asked after a while, her voice soft but direct. Ash didn't look at her. His eyes were still fixed on the horizon, the landscape stretching out like a canvas, waiting to be filled. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not staying." Eliza didn't push him for more. She had learned enough about Ash to know that he didn't speak about his decisions lightly. When he said he wasn't staying, there was something final about it. "Where will you go?" she asked, though she knew it didn't matter. Wherever he went, he would carry his past with him. It wasn't something he could leave behind, but at least it wasn't the burden it once had been. "I don't know," Ash replied. "Somewhere where I can finally stop running." His voice was thick, but there was a note of finality to it. For the first time, he wasn't running from anything, not the ghosts, not the fire, not the memories. He was walking away from them, but he wasn't carrying them on his back anymore. He was free. Eliza nodded, understanding more than she let on. She had seen the change in him. He had finally stopped hiding, stopped fighting the memories that had defined him for so long. But there was one more thing she needed to say. "You're not just leaving, Ash," Eliza said, her voice steady. "You're moving forward." Ash glanced at her then, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in what felt like days. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She was right. He wasn't running anymore. He was walking toward something, even if he didn't know exactly what that something was yet. For the first time in years, Ash felt like he could breathe. The land around them, the place that had once held nothing but memories of loss and pain, felt different now. It wasn't home, not in the way it had been before, but it was something new. Something that wasn't defined by his past. He let out a long breath, his chest rising and falling with the release of something he didn't even realize he'd been holding on to. Eliza's hand brushed his arm, light and reassuring. She didn't need to say anything else. She was with him, and that was enough. Ash turned toward her, his face softening for the first time in ages. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but full of something deeper than words. Gratitude, yes, but also something else. Something that felt like healing. Eliza smiled, a small, quiet smile, the kind that didn't need anything more than the truth between them. "You don't need to thank me." Ash nodded slowly, his eyes tracing the horizon once more. The weight of the past, the guilt, the pain, they were still there, but they didn't define him anymore. The sun sank lower, painting the world in golden light. It felt like a new beginning, but also the end of something old. Ash knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the past would try to creep back in. But today, standing beside Eliza, he felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, he could stop running. They stood there for a long time, watching the sky change, the silence between them no longer heavy but full of understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Ash felt the future stretch out before him, not as a weight, but as a possibility. A song began to play, soft and distant, carried by the wind. It was a song of the land, of the people who had lived and died here. A song of memories, of ghosts that had finally found peace. Ash didn't know the words, but he didn't need to. He knew the meaning. And for the first time, he listened.